Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. You are joining us on episode number 104.
104.
Very good.
I just want to say, now that we're in alignment and we're in agreement, right? I make fun of Nancy on this, and we got really goofy last week talking about laundry and all this and went off on a tangent. And so I just thought it was fun. When we left, I was like, oh, that was kind of a fun episode. I felt energized. And so over the weekend, we went to visit my parents, and on the way home, I was telling Nancy that, okay, you got to listen to the beginning of the podcast last week because I kind of made fun of you a little bit. And I didn't really make fun of you as much as
And then you pulled over to the side of the road and let her out.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I didn't really make fun of you as much as I had fun, about you. And so we're listening to it, and just kudos to Stephen, who is, wise beyond his years, even though he's old. So,
wait, what?
Last time you said 103, and I said 103. And then Nancy, who's an educator, kind of cringed and went, actually, it's, and then Stephen said
103.
103. And so she was like, oh my gosh, good for you, Stephen. You said it right.
Winner, chicken dinner.
Yes. So she was very impressed with Stephen's knowledge, not just in theology, but even in mathematics.
He can count, folks.
Yes, he can.
At least I can say words.
Speak properly.
103. Wait. 103. Something like that. Anyway, welcome to the Rabbit Trail. We're glad you guys are joining us. As you can see, this is a podcast where we're just going to go all over the place, but actually we are focused on chasing the truth wherever it runs, and we usually keep it somewhat contained within where the sermon from Olive Branch Community Church has gone, and that's the church sponsoring the podcast. Glad you guys are joining us today. My name is Greg Harris, and I'm the senior pastor at Olive Branch, and my compatriots here, Stephen and Brent, are with me every week, even when I'm not here. So why don't you guys say hi?
Hello, I'm Stephen Oldham, local outreach coordinator here at Olive Branch, and thank you for watching. And we're just getting used to some of your comments, so keep them coming on YouTube.
I'm going to change your title to the official, number master.
Yeah, don't do that, because then I'm going to have to do numbers, and I'm not a numbers guy.
Oh, okay.
Stephen
I can say numbers.
Math.
I don't want to do the math parts.
Well, you need to use a British accent in the entire time because you have the numbers down perfectly. 104. And that's just how we say it around here. It's perfect. Right?
Right.
No, I could do that differently if you want my team. We do it that way if you want.
Speaking of numbers,
yes.
I don't know. I don't really do accents at all. If I tried to do Australian, the only thing I would be able to say is throw another shrimp on the barbie. If I wanted to speak like New York, it would be like, hey, can you do an artificial fart under the arm? Those are like.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Your 411 thing, we'll have to say that another day, but.
411, I don't know.
You don't remember that when you were in New York?
And, that story. Yes, that was hilarious.
Anyway.
About the numbers. No, thank you so much. Our numbers on our YouTube page have gone up to 1,000 now?
It did. And just like a couple of weeks ago, we were begging people to subscribe just to get up to 700?
I guess. Yeah, it was something like that.
And so boom, we're 800, and now bam, we're here at 1,000.
And here's the funny thing. I don't know. Do you care? Do we care? Is that how this works? We're supposed to care, right?
If you share, we care.
I care. In fact, I'm running a list right now of how many YouTube channels in the area or across the nation have less than us. And so that I can look at that list and feel as though we have arrived. We are conquerors. People, join us in this movement.
He's like,
I'm just happy to say I think we have more people subscribed than Brent has hair.
You're like, tens of people are watching us.
I know. Even
it's great. We've made mini internet fame.
I will say that passage that God even numbers the hairs on your head has never impressed me.
So I just want to say thank you guys for your traffic and just your comments, and just share this with your friends and let us know where you're listening to us on. And thanks for giving us a subscription and a thumbs up.
There I am. I wasn't paying attention. So my name is Brent. I am the Connection Pastor here at Olive Branch Church, and I just want to say we really enjoy listening to your questions, discussing your questions. So if you have any questions, please email them to us at rabbittrail@obcc.church. If you have any concerns or comments, send them.
There are
again.
going to be concerns.
Yes.
There's lots of concerns.
Yeah, there are.
Well, lots of comments too.
If you're concerned about me and my mental state, let us know at rabbittrail@obcc.church. We would love to hear from you. I will say this. I was just emailing with somebody, Tommy, who's a listener, and he was signing up for the membership class, so we're trying to work out the dates that he could go. And he was responding to me, and at the end of it, he goes, basically he said, I don't care that a lot of people, don't think highly of you, but I like you on the rabbit trail. So thank you, Tommy. I always need the moral support.
Who's he talking to? Because apparently he knows a lot of people don't think highly of you.
Yeah. Well,
I was talking to my friends the other day, and I think highly of you, no matter what they say.
There you go. I mean, I can't even get my wife to listen on a consistent basis, so
You still are her favorite.
She keeps telling me that.
Yeah.
So that is a good thing. So on with the show. So we are in the series Offended. We're coming to the end of it, right? This coming week is the last one.
Pretty much the last one.
And so this one here, we were I don't remember what the title was, but it really was about confronting people. So dealing with serious offenses. So when you've offended or when you're seeing things that are offensive, confronting people in that. And I really kind of liked some of the things that you were saying. Not all of them, not all of them, but some of them.
I offended you a little bit on some of this.
I just but one of the things I think that you were talking about was confrontation sets up transformation. And you even shared a story where you were confronted when you were the youth pastor, and it kind of changed the trajectory of how you led, in youth and stuff like that. So there was this change in the transformation in you based on that confrontation. And again, you encourage us, and either through Scripture as well, to confront those, and then we'll deal with the second half of that with this coming week. But one of the things I think is important too is I do think that all of us could agree, except for those guys that just love confrontation, that just
really love it.
Yeah, they just throw bombs and leave,
that's not actually confrontation. A real confrontation stays in. A troll just throws a bomb and walks away.
Yeah.
They don't want to engage.
But I think for most of us, and when we're talking about this in a serious manner, confrontations are uncomfortable, for the most part. But they don't have to be ugly. Right? I mean, the confrontation doesn't necessarily mean a fight and an argument and an ugliness.
I disagree.
Vitriol.
I'm just kidding.
I confront you on that statement. But it does set up transformation, and it needs to be done in a loving way. So to kind of touch on what you were going with on that.
Oh well, I think the idea of a confrontation always causes people to think that it's going to be a yelling, screaming match of some kind, right? Because a lot of people grow up in homes where a confrontation, they think of confrontation as a heated event. Just like we think of anger as not an emotion that's good and generates energy to solve a problem, but we think of it as yelling and screaming. Well, those are different things. What you do with your anger can be that it energizes you to solve a problem, or it can come out of you in a mean, cruel manner. Same thing with a confrontation. A confrontation can be something that you intend for the sake of a healing. It's almost like suffering and pain in some ways. Like I was listening to another podcast, I think biblically from Biola, and they were doing one on animal rights and looking at Peter Singer's animal rights thing. And Peter Singer's basic thing is like, look, in utilitarianism, which is a philosophy, they were like, pain, nobody wants to suffer, and nobody wants to inflict suffering, and so it's pain or pleasure. These are the only two options, right?
And I do think animal rights are important, and I just remember probably in the late 80s when a bunch of animals got up and picketed, around my house, and we realized, no, we do need to treat them differently, and if it wasn't for that picket line and the strike that they put on, I don't know that I would have changed my mind. I'm sorry. Go
So,
ahead.
so you're vegan now? Anyway, the
They were yummy.
different kind of strike. All right. But the idea is that this idea that pain and pleasure, suffering, nobody wants to inflict suffering. Well, yes, you do if you're trying to heal. If you're trying to bring, if a surgeon is going to inflict some kind of pain in order to bring about a healing, well, because they got to open the wound up to do something. Well, yeah, we want to minimize that as much as possible. So we do anesthesiology. But the pain of healing later is never going to go away. And in fact, there's also very clear representation of Scripture that suffering and pain produces character. It produces development of just the ability to endure. There's just we even say it, no pain, no gain, right? In exercise, it's like, oh, it's suffering. So I just disagree with that basic idea that Singer brings out. And so I also disagree with the basic idea that all confrontation is therefore then bad because, oh my gosh, we're going to be fighting and hurting each other. No, confrontation can be healing. Confrontation should be aimed at reconciliation. I brought it back. Okay, so and so when I think about like confrontation, a loving confrontation means that we're coming with the aim not to win a war, but to fix a relationship. And I think we have to get past the competitive nature that we can feel of wanting to be right. I want to be right. No. This isn't about being right. You've already wronged someone or somebody's already wronged you. You shouldn't need to be. It's not about like I'm right. It's about
the different scenario.
Yeah, I want to see us brought together. I don't want this gap between us any longer, or I want to forgive you. And this is the Christian call to reconciliation. So, I don't know, your thoughts, Stephen, on confrontations?
Well, I mean, it always goes back to I remember we're going into Peter, but just the 1 Peter 3 verse 17 was talking about people having harm or suffering come to you. And it says, for it's better to suffer for doing good if that should be God's will. And that kind of struck me because I was like, wait, it would be God's will that I would suffer a difficulty of something. In this case, it's a slander against you because you're being good. But in an argument, you should be reconciling. And I think the fear is that I'm going to argue and they're not going to listen to the truth. And neither one of us is going to find the truth because it's so complicated. But it's better to try and seek the good and suffer for that because that's God's will than it would be for being suffering for doing evil, which would be doing nothing and just letting the evil run free and not addressing it in your life. So I do think there's just so many passages in Peter, but also in other parts of the Bible where we're called to do things that are hard. God saved you so that you could follow his example of suffering. I'm like, that does not sound pleasant at all. And so when it comes to trying to reconcile with someone or trying to get into a conversation, I think we're trying to avoid pain or avoid a conflict that causes hardship. And then you also find out real quickly that you could be wrong. And you kind of want grace, but you don't know if you should give grace because will you get it? And so it gets kind of messy. And so the idea is that the reason why I think the Bible is clear is it's trying to say if you both seek God's will in that, even if it's messy, you're trying to do the thing that pleases God in the midst of it. And I don't know if that's the way people go into arguments. I do think people go into the arguments to either validate your own opinion, which is why the self-examination portion is important, but also we no longer value conversations that might be high or heated in that resolve to truth. Most people want to resolve to fighting, right? So like I always say people, are you wanting to persuade me to your opinion or you want to cajole me into it? Like, beat me down into it. And you have to ask yourself, what do I want from the other person? Do I want them to submit to my will, or do I want them to reconcile to a truth that I believe? And how I approach that is very different. One is more like, you are terrible, and the other one is like more like, well, let's talk about it. Let's think, is this true? Is this really what happened? Is that what you were thinking? Is that what the facts show? One is exploring the truth. And I don't know in our society where truth is not a thing that we can come to outside of ourselves. That's why I think there's more arguing is that if you don't believe in something objectively true that both of you can discover, then to me, it's more difficult to find truth because you don't believe it exists. You believe whatever you feel is true.
That's why I think one of the important words that you used was loving confrontation. And I think
not enjoying confrontation.
A
loving confrontation.
Not loving confrontation, but coming in a loving spirit, right? And really that really is to in that coming in that loving expectation, I think is you come with a humility, in it. You're coming for what is best for the person and what is best for the relationship as well, and not a superiority, position. And I think that's the log in your eye thing, is just, hey, don't think you're better, come with humility in this too.
Actually, a curious thought, because this leads me to thinking like some of what we were doing before we started was looking at the comment section, right? And comments are, I don't know what they were intended for originally on any.
They were intended to create some kind of conversations, but not anymore.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because of a lack of we're not real great at writing, anymore, and we don't know how to form an argument. We don't know. I mean, sometimes we had a couple that just somebody just threw a verse on there in response to something we had said, and I'm like, and we could interpret that as pro or con, but where's the context? Like what? And I'm confused because I feel like these are people who are they think they need to confront this or whatever they think they're hearing, but there's no context to the confrontation. It's almost like you need to read my mind and I'm going to say something and I'm right, and I'm like, that's warfare level. That's like using
tricks,
scriptures as bullets and fire. And it's like, see, I won. It's like
landmines
or whatever. It doesn't make. I don't know if this kind of stuff is helping dialogue in a culture.
Also, just the ability to trigger response is never usually wise. Thinking through an argument, writing it down, and trying to bring down some of the emotion is usually a better way at de-escalating each other. Because if I put you on edge, the only response typically is to be on edge and defend yourself. So if I put you on the defensive with a comment, we're not seeking truth now, we're in combat. And so I don't know where the truth falls in that. So it's like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to proclaim? And is that clear? If I was in your shoes and you said that to me, how would I hear it? Like that idea that I want you to understand what I'm saying. I want you to hear it clearly and then make sure that I say it clearly so that we're talking on the same page. I don't know if that's something people are interested in anymore, because you really do have to care that the other person may not hear it the way you do.
Maybe it's because we define it as a comment section instead of a question section or a dialogue, communications,
conversations.
This is just comment. I get to comment. I get to say something.
I do think we live in a culture that everybody just wants to be heard or think they're heard. They don't really want to hear. And it's just I just want to make statements and let people know how I feel or what I think, and I don't want to take the time to know what you think.
Well, also you can hear things out of context too on the internet. But I just remember going back. If you go back to when the internet first came out, they used to have forums. I don't know if you guys remember forums. Do you remember forums?
Oh yeah.
People
would join them.
Yeah, they would do long form discussions and debates.
This is even before MySpace, right?
Yeah, you'd have to log in. You'd have to make yourself kind of known, and you'd have to be on there. There were moderators monitoring the conversation.
Yep.
And you would have to articulate long positions, and then you can go back and forth. But you kind of, what happened was with the technology changing, people going from other formats to Facebook and Twitter, you got short, choppy, emotional sound bites that
with
are
an algorithm playing moderator.
Yeah, with an algorithm playing monitor, and now you've removed the human element of going, oh, someone's actually watching what I'm saying and policing it, and there are certain standards I agreed to talk on this format and stuff. So now we depersonalize it, but we made it more efficient for you to say whatever is on your feelings, not on your mind. And so I feel like people just regurgitate an opinion, and I don't know if anyone has a frame of reference from where it's coming from. And so just I always asking yourself, what do I hope to accomplish in my communication on a forum or in a format or when I say stuff to people?
This is all in the context of confrontation, because I do think that what we're trying to do, this is again, if we're looking at that target of offense, we're out here on disagreement, and it really, if you're getting bent up on a statement online or something you heard and you're all I gotta say something. I mean, I think you need to step back and go wait, why do I need to say something? Why do I need to say something? And why do I need to say something? And then ask, what do I really need to say? Do I understand what they're saying? I mean, there's so many questions I have before I would ever want to engage that usually stops me from ever engaging. Do I have a voice in this conversation? Do I have an understanding of the context and the content? Do I want to open myself up to the dialogue? I mean, could I defend my position effectively enough if I'm going to state it? These kinds of things that go on. And I think it's interesting that we can just feel so free to, I don't feel free to just like, you know, I don't feel free oftentimes on this podcast just say stuff. And I don't know if I've researched or looked it up or tried to work on it for a while.
See, I don't have that problem.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. One of us.
I just say things, and so I just count on you guys to know how to correct me.
Well, it's just like I like 2 Timothy 2:15. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved. Okay, so I'm not just saying stuff for myself. As a worker who has no need to be ashamed, so I have to monitor my behavior, rightly handling the word of truth. So like, okay, so now I have this thing that I've been entrusted to. How do I try to bring it about in the lives of myself and other people, especially when it pertains to how you live in your Christian worldview? Because I think we're not supposed to live like other people that just spur of the moment have all these triggered opinions that come out. You're supposed to be well thought out because you were entrusted with the truth. And I still remember, it reminds me of the game, you know, I'm going on a trip, you know, where I'm going on a trip and I'm going to take, and you're trying to figure out the pattern of how you can go into the game. And to get the game going, I would tell somebody like, well, here's the pattern. And you would watch them just lord over everybody like, oh, you're so dumb. How come you don't know the pattern? I'm like, dude, I gave you the pattern. You didn't know the pattern. You didn't have to figure it out. You should be a little more gracious to get the game going. And so that's kind of what happens. God goes, I showed you my truth. And then you go around like this, then you misrepresent me. And it's just like, that's what I think the Christian has to think about when we're trying to reconcile God to the truth. We don't want to avoid it, but we also want to do it well. And so you're entrusted with the words of truth. And that has a responsibility different.
There's a humility to that.
Yeah, there's like, oh, I wasn't given this. I was given this. It wasn't something I came up with on my own. You might have learned it, but God allowed you to see it. So that's where the humility comes in and being a persuader. And you see Jesus modeling this. Here's the God of the universe debating with people who don't know what they're talking about. Like, and so he's very patient. Like, oh, really? You think that? Why? Who told you this? Or why do you think that? He's still like engaging to get the truth to come out.
Have you not read?
Yeah. And so it's just like the way he does it is just like, imagine the patience it would take to be the creator of the universe, to know the hearts of everybody you're talking to, and still take the patience to bring them around to the truth.
It sort of feels like talking to like toddlers and stuff, you know. So,
but even in the way he confronts people, when he gets mad, there's a reason. You know, there's a reason usually. So.
Yeah, right. And I mean, you know, and a lot of the sermon was kind of based on the Matthew 18, you know, chapter, and it really is just, you know, if somebody has sinned against you, Christ saying, go confront them, you know, go talk to them, go to them one-on-one in private, and have that discussion. And again, I really liked what you said. You're not just going to confront them because they've offended you. You're going there to confront, you're going to engage in a loving confrontation for the sake of reconciliation. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17 on, and you know, it says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled himself to us and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. So really, I mean, as we are approaching people, that is the goal, that is the purpose, is to reconcile them, you know, with you, but also to reconcile them with God, right? I mean, that is the whole thing. And so, you know, I really liked what you said, and just kind of touch on that too, is in that idea too, I think we as Christians think that, you know, giving our life to the Lord and asking for forgiveness, that Jesus is all about forgiveness, you know, and you may have,
well, people
you
say
know,
that
forgiveness isn't his thing as much as reconciliation.
Right.
There has to be the forgiveness in order to move into reconciliation, but that's the business he's in, not just, I just want to forgive the world of everything they've done wrong. No, I want to bring forgiveness into this relationship for the sake of reconciling the relationship.
It almost
right?
sounds like forgiveness in that sense is acceptance.
Oh, I think, yeah, I agree. That's what it sounds like to me. They want God to
forgives everybody, which sounds like God accepts everything that everybody does. Like, I don't know if I agree with that.
Well, there's so much like with the idea of what it has to be paid. Like my favorite thing that's really helped me was that whole story I told 2 weeks ago on like the person who broke the vase or the lamp stand in the little glass lamp stand in our house. Like we were really struggling for money at the time. It was the first time my wife had ever really purchased something that was like, oh, she bought it because she thought it was pretty and she really wanted to decorate that spot. And this person broke it and didn't even like, just laughed at it. Like, oh, haha, sorry. And she was so devastated, like cried about it the next day, was so upset. And it was like, because we didn't have any money to replace it. It cost us like, it was like $25. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot for us at that point. 4 kids and things weren't great. And suddenly now we're looking at, we just lost $25 for that thing. And we're going to have to spend it again if we want to put it back. Like that's $50. So it's not only making it right through the loss of the actual item, and then there's the actual replacement of the item. That's not a $25 loss, it's a $50 loss. There's the restitution and the penalty. Like those two things go together. And so when we talk about forgiveness so flippantly, we're just like, I just forgave it. You're like, wait. That means you understand what you're absorbing. You understand what God's doing here, right? He's having to take on all the penalty of your lie, like, and how it led somebody astray to make a bad decision, and how it made somebody distrust the church, or it made somebody distrust you, and then now they can't trust other people because people just lie to them all the time. And all of that pain that's caused by our lies or our lie is being absorbed by Christ. Like, it seems almost like that's not fair. That's not right. That's he can't why would he forgive that person the thing he did to me? Like that doesn't make sense, except that Christ had to suffer to pay for it. Like he's literally going to take your suffering.
Yeah.
That's very different. So forgiveness is a very heavy topic, and it became so flippant in so many ways.
It's like when people say, well, this is free. I'm like, well, it's free to you, but someone paid that to get that to you for free.
It's just really, really difficult to comprehend. And then we're talking about in these cases where we're discussing like, no, this is a forgiveness that starts a process of reconciliation, and reconciliation being wanting the relationship to be right. Now, again, being very clear that doesn't mean trust is fully restored right at that moment.
Or demanded.
Yeah, or demanded by the other person. That's a good point. So that there's a process that's opened to begin to heal. We'll cover that process, a little bit of that process. We can't hit everything.
Yeah, we talk about safety and other things. You mentioned it in the sermon.
And I think one of the healthy things in this is that confrontation. Go immediately to them and talk to them. And be clear.
Not immediately, but eventually.
Okay.
It's because there's no immediate in here. It's eventually. And I say eventually because I really think cool off, think through what's gone on. There's a whole process of responsibility that you should go through before you, go in. We mess so many things up because we jump the gun, right?
And one of the things we do in premarital counseling too is tell people, there is that passage that says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. And when we tell, I always tell them, it's okay to do that sometimes, like it's 2:00 in the morning and you're getting more and more agitated and you're just going in circles. You're both angry. It's okay to go to sleep and pick it back up the next day when the emotions are a little less clear. But I do think that there's that intention of confronting somebody with something. And I know for me, I don't always do that in the healthiest ways. And I haven't done it healthy in my marriage a lot of the times and other things. And part of that is because I am a very passive aggressive, I'm not super aggressive. I'm more on the passive side, but I deal with things that I know that need to be confronted with sarcasm, little digs here and there, kind of just, I'll just use it as a little dig. So hopefully they get, that light comes on in their head that, oh, that's probably not good. I should probably change. That doesn't never work. But you just make these digs that are like little drips of poison on somebody. And if we just would discuss it and bring reconciliation to that issue with one discussion instead of 100 fiery darts.
Yeah, I was thinking about your statement on the anger thing because, I think there's two. Paul's being very balanced when he says be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger.
Ephesians 4:26.
Yeah, Ephesians 4:26. Yeah, he's doing this balancing act, right? Because I think some people they just jump at their anger and they sin. I mean, they're not prepared. They don't calm down. They don't use the anger for energy to reconcile. And then there's other people like you and me would say, or that are like, oh, we just let the sun go down on our anger. We just, and then it goes down again, and then it goes down again, and it just never comes up. So there's like those two sides. That's like, everything needs to be addressed, or I'm not addressing anything. And Paul's kind of like, no, address it, but make sure it's in a timely manner. What I get from that passage.
Yeah.
Right.
Because if it's just 24 hours tag, you don't even know if you're in the right mindset.
Yeah. What happens if she offends you right, or he offends you right when you're going to bed? It's like you're about to fall asleep. It's like, well, do I have to wait till the next time? Well,
yeah, that's like 70 times.
And I just found, we've been married for 40 years, and I just know that sometimes we're fighting, and we're not really fighting about what we started fighting about. We're just fighting about how we are angry and, talking to each other. And, you got to get up at 5:30 in the morning, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're getting more agitated because this isn't going anywhere. And it's just like, this isn't going to be solved before I have to leave for work, and don't want to go to work with no sleep at all. So let's just pause. We'll pick this back up tomorrow. And that's the thing. We usually have been pretty good about picking it back up the next day if we're in that kind of a situation. And we don't have those situations nearly
enough.
No, yeah, exactly. But we don't have those situations nearly as frequently as we did earlier in our marriage.
You bring up a good point, because one of the things about this that I didn't say is that when you go into confrontation, you need to keep that main thing the main thing.
Yeah.
Oftentimes in a confrontation and a fight kicks in, you devolve into fighting tactics, ad hominem attacks, mishearing and not trying to figure out and understand the other person and what they're saying. You just assume what their language means. It's just bad communication starts to break in, right? So suddenly when that happens, you start fighting over how you're fighting. And the issue, like Tress and I will do, when we do the premarital counseling, we'll do this, like, here's a book, and we're both holding the book. And then eventually I say something that offends her. And so now I let go of the book and offend her. And then she throws the book on the floor and, pushes me back. So we both now offended each other. We're pushing on each other, offending. The problem's on the floor. And then these marriages they'll apologize and make up for the way they offended each other. And then, usually you can have makeup sex, all that stuff. But the problem didn't get solved. Right. It's still and so any kind of confrontation, between friends, between coworkers, you have to keep the main thing and not get distracted into, how you're fighting versus what you're dealing with in the confrontation.
And in that too, you've thrown that book on the floor and you started just fighting about fighting, and then you make up and you feel like you have resolve that problem, but you didn't, and so again, the next time you pick up that book, it is bigger. Full of the emotions that you dropped it with. Yeah, so it becomes a bigger and bigger deal every time you don't resolve it. And it just, and sometimes you get in these fights and you're like, that was a big fight, and that's a really stupid little problem. Why is it so big? Because you've dropped that problem on the floor 50 times, and that emotion just keeps collecting momentum. And what were you going to say?
No, just I guess I can ask you guys, when you guys started in your relationships, and now I think the most difficult relationships are the confront, or the ones you're the closest to. Do you worry about couples who never fight, or who are constantly avoiding fights?
Absolutely.
Or don't know how to fight well, or
both? I worry about couples that don't fight because they think somehow they don't have confrontation because they're afraid of it. Tress and I really believe that the more you truly resolve confrontations, Like you bind yourselves closer together. The point of a conflict, if the point of a conflict is to bring a resolution, then when you and restitution of the relationship, every time you truly fix it, you put a link in that relationship that is very strong. If you do that every time there's actually a real problem and you truly go through the conflict, truly deal with the issue, come out where it's our thing, not a your thing or my thing, it's our thing, that binds that friendship or that relationship closer together. If you don't confront, you literally will just continue in your own bubbles and circles, and it becomes theirs or yours and mine, or we'll just agree to disagree, and that there's no resolutions that create that connection. Bad fighting, what that does is that just hardens each other against each other. And so bad fighting usually occurs because we don't take the time to slow our roll down and ask good questions about, well, what did you mean? And why did you say it that way? This is what I heard. Is that what you meant? And believing the other person and giving them the right. This is what James is getting into later in his section, where he's talking about, sincere and open to reason, but also he's like full of mercy. I used to get in trouble with Teresa because I would get into a conversation I hadn't thought about. And man, she is so smart and so fast at coming up with the right arguments and the right and I just sitting there feeling stupid and and so I'm just making stuff up and I'm like, what was that thing? And she's just like, oh my gosh, and just I'm like, wait, back that off. Like, I want to suck that back in. So, can I put that back in? And she had to learn to give me mercy that I was speaking out loud, trying to figure out and resolve my emotions and my thoughts in the midst of all this. And praise God, she gave me that, but it's what helped us start to overcome in some of our more difficult conversations, because I either need to say, I need a timeout, I just need to pray about this and go think about this, or I would say, hey, just give me grace. I'm really trying to work this out. So work with me here on this conversation, because I'm going to say things that I may not actually believe yet, but I'm just saying them, and I'm going to say them confidently, but just know I'm just spitballing and working it out. When we came to that conversation, it really resolved a lot of our tensions in our fights. Now, we still go after each other in confrontation on purpose for the sake of
getting it out,
dealing with what are the problems.
Yes.
And
getting to the roots.
Yeah.
And I do think, though, I know a couple that was happy, and they're just coasting along, and they were just, they were just like, we have the best relationship. We love each other. We enjoy each other. We never fight. We have great communication. And so I was like, oh, okay, and I'm thinking, I don't think in order to have intimacy, you have to have conflict all the time, but
no.
A conflict-free relationship is a shallow relationship, right? And so one time I mentioned to them about, did you talk to your spouse about this money issue? And they're like, oh, no, I can't talk to them about that. They'll blow up. So it really wasn't like you had this great communication and this great, it's like we tiptoed around problems. And so they didn't have that intimacy in their relationship. They kind of had a very shallow relationship. And I do think, like what Greg was saying too, when you resolve conflicts in your relationship, it builds momentum for your relationship, and it builds a trust and a confidence in your relationship to where the next time a problem comes up, okay, we've resolved conflict before in a healthy manner. We can attack this and deal with this issue. If you've never learned how to resolve a conflict in your relationship, then you're never going to grow in that relationship.
And Teresa will say it loud and clear. I wish she was sitting here. She'd be yelling it as like the top of her lungs. She's like, this is why we need to focus on single men and women more than marriages in the church, because it's single men and women that get married. If they can't learn how to do this outside of the marriage, we're not bringing healthy people into marriages. And so she's just like, no, teach the teenagers, teach the college people, teach people, everybody, how to go through good conflict. Because when we don't have the skill base for a good relationship, even a marriage. And it shouldn't be that you have to learn this stuff in a marriage. It should be that we learn this in the body of Christ together, right? I mean, Stephen.
I just, my word, because I was a singles minister for a long time, a lot of times what people do, I see they carry into their marriages, they even silo out their community. So they feel like I can't share with anyone close to me to get an outside because I want to keep it between the two of us. And I'm like, that seems unhealthy. It doesn't mean you tell everybody, but you tell the person who's rooting for your marriage is kind of how I...
You're rooting for the relationship.
Yeah, they're rooting for your success. They're not trying to like pick a side. They're trying to root for your success.
And I think that is very key. Is like if you talk to a friend, right, and they're pointing you back to the relationship and back to health, that's a friend you want to confide in. The one that's taking your side going, you're right, he's a jerk, you should just, then no, don't talk to that person anymore.
It leads back to the old youth group illustration where you would sit there and go, oh, you know that guy who's hanging out with you? And he's like, oh, dude, you're right. You're always right. Oh, man. Hey, yeah, you want to go jump in that car and take it? Let's do that together. Oh, man, let's go get those beers and get drunk. That's an awesome... You know that guy is called the devil. Yeah. He's the one who's always ready to do your thing that you want to do. And you don't want that person giving you advice. But it leads to that question I asked on Sunday, which is like, who in your life can tell you stop or no, and you'll listen to them?
Or even question something about you.
Or do you have somebody in your life that feels like they have the permission to do that?
I mean, I'm privileged to say that I get to hang out for an hour and a half with two of the guys that do that for me. And I know I know that's reciprocal between us, and it's just, I find it extremely powerful and valuable to know that if I'm really screwing something up, I've got people who are going to tell me. I know my wife's going to be on me. I know that you guys are going to be there.
Before your good. Yeah, before each of our goods. Yeah. It's really hard to find someone. I just don't think anyone in life knows how to find someone that they trust. I think they want someone to agree with them, and that's not the person you want. You want someone that you can trust, that will tell you God's truth, not someone that agrees with you and your version of the truth. Mm-hmm. And so to me, I think we live in a world of affirmation, and you don't want to be affirmed in every area of your life. That sounds like a recipe for death. Yeah. Because you're going to kill yourself with that kind of affirmation. And that's why we live in a world where no one can say anything to anyone for fear that it might be true. And you're controlled by everyone when you do that.
So, and I think that's why I do think that's why we're afraid to engage conflict in the first place. Not conflict, but confrontation. Again, conflict is different than confrontation. A confrontation does not have to be conflict. Right. In fact, if it turns into conflict, you're using the wrong rules. You're using war rules. You're trying to win by surprise and change definitions and gotcha questions. We're talking about confrontation that's loving, that's desiring the whole of the relationship. And man, it's so critical. I know in a group that I work with, like one of the things you have to do, and he says he's talking about it, when you enter into a difficult conversation, I think this applies to, I'm going to just apply it generally to all relationships. And it's getting bad, like that person, you feel like it's not going well. You have to step back and ask yourself a couple questions. Number one, just go okay, this isn't about us being equal. This isn't about us being, sometimes it's not equal and sometimes it doesn't matter. What's their character though? Remember their character. Remember who they are. They're your friend. They're your wife. They're your kid. You know who they are. Okay, keep that in mind and then ask, what's the truth in what they're saying? What's the real truth? The truth is, okay, yeah, they care about you. They're your friend. What's the lie? Oh, they hate me and they're just trying to crush me. Well, there's the lie. And then so put those aside and filter those out. And then what's the real need you're looking for?
And that's
why is
the
lie powerful?
Oh, they hate me. They don't, part of that lie sometimes is you just don't want to deal with it, You don't want to deal with the truth. So you just, you're just saying that because, you don't like me or whatever, and so now you disregard the truth because you don't want to change the truth. But I liked what Stephen said. I think before we started talking too was you were talking in confrontation and stuff. We're going for the win-win. Not the win-lose. And again, in any relationship, and I always say this about marriage, but it's any relationship. During a conflict or confrontation, I can't win and you lose and the relationship not lose, And so really, it has to be a win-win because, You know, if I win and you lose, there is division there. You know, and if we just have that mindset that no, we want what's best for us each, and we want what's best for the relationship. We win together and we lose together, and it brings unity to the process.
I just think this points out how often, in all honesty, confrontations are necessary. One of the reasons I think about this a lot. Like, what's causing all the divisions out there? And I really think offense is a primary factor when you use comment sections, whatever, because what we're doing is we're putting everybody into conflict scenarios instead of confrontation out of love. Like, hey, I really want this to be, I really want to be connected. I really want to understand. I really want to, that when somebody comes with that kind of a heart, that's a give and take relationship. That's powerful. That starts to bind people together. When it comes, you don't get me, and I'm just comment at you or whatever. That's a different issue. And so when we get into that world, we end up in that proverb situation where we're like, an offended person stronger than a city that's besieged. You can't even get through it. And what we're creating is so much division and so much brokenness because we want to avoid confrontation that brings transformation, and that transformation brings reconciliation. That's the process, right? Confrontation, transformation, reconciliation. And if those three things aren't happening, and it starts with forgiveness, where you're able to forgive because this isn't about a fight. Now I come in lovingly, hoping for a confrontation that brings a transformation. That transformation happens. Now reconciliation can begin. This movement of trust. And what's crazy is that we're talking about when somebody sins against you. Now, there is a variation on this text in Matthew 18. In the first line, in verse 15, actually says, if your brother sins. It doesn't have the against you in certain manuscripts, ancient manuscripts. And there's a debate over which one's appropriate. Like, is it like the NIV reads, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault. You know, the ESV is, hey, if your brother sins against you, the Net Bible, if your brother sins, go and show him his fault. Lexham, now if your brother sins against you. So there's a debated concept out here about which is it? Is it against you or is it against sin in general? And most go with the against you portion here because they're not sure why you would drop it, why it would be there, except that other passages like in the Galatians chapter 6 says, hey, if you see your brother caught in sin, go and help him out if you're spiritual. So there is a context in which we as the brotherhood, the let's put it this way, the sibling family of God called the church, that even if we see somebody who's just caught up in their own sin, and it's not even a sin against me, it's just they're just caught in a sin, they're caught in some kind of addiction, they're caught in some kind of, like, we need to go to them and try to aid and help them be free. And I think we're so ashamed of our sin and so afraid that the church is so judgmental and whatever. It's like, we're just destroying the possibility of people being free. Like, how many people are just bound up by their addictions and sins that could be freed because we're willing to not only preach the gospel of Jesus who sets us free, but then come around each other and encourage one another and build each other up. And yes, know each other through confrontation and still love each other. Isn't that when you really know you're loved? Like, you have a confrontation and that person is like, at the end of it, I still love you. I think of how many times we've all gone through some pretty, like, some serious confrontations. You and I have gone through some pretty heated things. I've gotten heated at you, and this dude, I've never seen you heated back, but that's because you think you just punch me and I'd die. But I'm just kidding. But it's those kinds of things that didn't stop me from trusting you, that built trust, right? I mean, I feel more like I can be truly who I am because you've been willing to receive me in a confrontation. Mm-hmm. And that's just critical. And that's why I really think the answer to that whole back question of, like, if a relationship is not having conflict or appropriate conflict, then it can't be good.
It's hard for me because you do have to examine, like, what is your relationship with conflict growing up, and how was it modeled to you? And so just knowing that, like, in my family of origin, getting it all out was always better than holding it all in. And so, but that's a style, right? That means that my family is usually pretty brutal up front. And so, but you know that it's like, we need to get this out of the way. but that comes with a trust. But not everybody's family deals with conflict that way. So what's really hard is when you're trying to, that's why it says extend mercy, because people need to be able to articulate their own opinions, even if they're not aware of it in front of you, and you have to give them mercy if you're quick to do that. And so to me, just recognizing that none of us, I think, do this well without practicing. And I think there's this idea that if I know all of it and I read the scriptures and I pray a lot, that I don't have to practice this with other people. And I was like, even if you were really good at it and you practiced it, everybody's so uniquely different in their family of origin that you still have to extend a lot of mercy. And you also have to be a truth seeker. So those two things have to go together to me. There has to be like, I have to love the truth even more than what I might get or lose out of the situation, even if it comes against me or comes against the situation, because that's what would bring glory to God. But that's hard to do. And anyone tells you it's really easy is probably not done it as.
and it is hard even, going into it, understanding how you want to conduct yourself through it. It is difficult to keep those reins on your emotions
it's hard
as well. But the other side too is I think it's important, as you are lovingly confronting somebody or contemplating that, first, be humble. Number two, be prayerful in that. And number three too, really understand what it is you want out of this discussion, because if you want to just fight, that's pretty easy.
That's why you got to start with forgiveness. It's not a true loving confrontation if it doesn't start with forgiveness.
Right. And so understanding that fight isn't what I want. I want reconciliation. I want resolution.
I want transformation. I think it's right to say I want
in myself and them.
Yeah. In fact, if you want just a good space in Scripture to just stop and ponder. I brought the text up, but this is like my favorite text. I think this is like a handbook section on how to really deal and make peace. I love the Philippians section, like where you think of those pieces. In a more abstract form, James just nails it down. He says, "Who is wise and understanding among you?" This is James chapter 3, beginning in verse 13. He says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false about the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic." So if you want to really know what the demonic, unspiritual kind of living is, have an aim to be like all about you. Be bitter and angry and jealous and like be somebody who's so concerned about what you are and how I look and what I'm doing, and that's called selfish ambition. That is actually the demonic form. Now, what does he say is the good one? He says, "For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there's every disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure." So first of all, it's attempting to be pure in its speech, pure in its like, it's not going to cuss at you and yell at you and break you down. It's godly kind of speech, right? Second, it's going to be peaceable. So it's seeking peace. It's not seeking fight. It's not seeking to win. It's seeking all things in the right place. That's what shalom, peace, kind of means, arene. And so then you get gentle. Well, that means over the way that we deliver our own power, our own strength. Like, we're not going to crush you. We're not going to, and that's that kind of self-control piece. Open to reason. Well, that means, guess what? You're going to think through it. You're going to ask questions. You're going to apply logic. You're going to apply, that's the word reason there. You're going to be able to be convinced of a different position than yourself. That's critical. And then he goes on, full of mercy. We talked about that, assuming the best of the other person. Good fruits, which is this idea of could be this fruit of the Spirit, or it could simply just mean that it's going to produce good works out of it. It's full of, you're seeing good things come forth. And that's the idea. It's not producing like more negative and evil. Oh no, this is producing good. We're moving forward. This is helpful. It's impartial, which means that you're not on your own side even. You're just kind of like, I'm trying to do my best to stay neutral to what is true and not what I think is true, right? Yeah. But yet you're sincere. You still should say,
I think this is true.
This is what I think is true. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to, and then yet reason with me. Show me this direction. That's the heavenly wisdom. And he says, a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. This is a peacemaker. This section, those little things, you apply those and practice those in your confrontations, and it will, I believe, help at work, help in friendships, help anywhere you're into, you need to have a confrontation, because those are critical pieces.
And what passage was that?
That's James chapter 3, verse 13 through 18.
And that's your favorite? My favorite verse is, ask whatever you want in my name, and it'll be given to you. That's my favorite.
Pluck that right out of context.
Speaking of out of context, a bunch of the sermon was based in Matthew 18. So I got like a little 3 points here that we can discuss. And number one, it talks about going to the person, right? And then it talks about discipline. Is that our job, or is that the church's job in that regard? Excommunication, and where two or more are gathered, and it's not talking about prayer. Two or more are gathered.
Even though every commentator still struggles with what it is talking about prayer.
Yeah, I do believe that, if two people are praying, that's better than just one praying. But this passage definitely is not talking about prayer. It is talking about church discipline. So again,
those binding things.
Yeah. So again, when it's talking about the
magics.
discipline and the binding and excommunication, the importance of those things. And so.
Yeah. So again, I think that I like frame up what you're thinking. Like,
well, I feel like church discipline is important, and it is a lot less potent than it used to be. I think
it's not done as much as it was.
It's not done as
very
much,
difficult to do.
but I also feel like churches used to be in the center of the community, and everybody was part of that community and that social structure too. And so when you were excommunicated or when you were disciplined, and part of the excommunication is to cast them out so that they would repent and come back, not just to kick them out. But because we have gone from that kind of small community to bigger communities, rural communities and all those
suburban.
things, where people don't have that total community and social circle impact in their church anymore. So if the church tells you you need to, you need to do this
right.
and try to enforce any sort of discipline, they're just kind of like, yeah, I'll go down the street, So they escape any sort of accountability or discipline.
Well, that's the scary thing.
Church polity.
Yeah, we think that you escape, but the scary thing is it says that. Notice it doesn't say if. Again, I say to you, if all of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it'll be done for them by my Father in heaven. No, he says, no. Whatever you bind on earth, that shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose, and that the you there is plural, loose on earth is be loosed in heaven. Whatever. And again, binding is literally either a contract or tying somebody up. It's not. I can't find a spiritual context in all the Bible on the word bound or bind in the New Testament. And I could be wrong. I just did a quick look and I was not really finding it, other than bind the strong man, and that's a picture of literally you got to tie up the strongest guy in the house and kick him out. Mm-hmm. But here in this case, we're talking about like spiritual disciplines, where the church has been refused to be listened to. And so now they're going to, and this was done in synagogues. You would write up a contract and you were bound to the contract. Well, the church was supposed to act like that, as a community. And so now you're out of the community. I get what you're saying though. Is like, there was only one church in Ephesus.
Well, you can't travel that far.
And you can't go that far. And now we can go wherever we want. And that's where I think God kind of knew what was going on. He says, if you are to agree on anything on earth, or he says, what's bound on earth is bound in heaven. And if you guys agree, my Father's going to do it. If it's a legitimate church binding, go wherever you want.
You can't just bind anything you want. It's not like the papacy.
Yeah, no,
right?
This is legitimately, you have sinned. You've not listened to the church on its discipline. They've given you a document telling you how to follow up. If that was done and it was agreed upon by those who wrote it up, the elders in the church or whatever.
And it was godly.
And it was godly and just, go wherever you want. God is actually will bar you from heaven. That's the scary thing.
Because, I mean, you know, I can even think back, you know, and I mean, I wasn't part of it because I didn't grow up in a Christian home, but I mean, just remembering, you know, like even just as far back as the 50s, right? You know, people took church membership very seriously. And so seriously, too, that if you moved to another place and wanted to, you know, join that church, they needed a letter from your other church saying that you were in good standing with the church, you know. And so it wasn't like you could just go somewhere and hide, and, you know, you were expected to be part of that congregation, and there was background checks. And
we still do that sometimes.
How often do you ever get a letter that says,
it's pretty rare.
Still happens?
It
still happens, but it's very rare. It's usually from somebody who moved from the East Coast or the South.
Yeah.
Like California? No. I mean, I've had requests, but that's been like 3, and I've done ministry for 20 plus years. So it's like, that's not very often. So I think that what's interesting is that, church hopping can happen. But again, this isn't even about like the punishing. This is about reconciliation. Right. This is an attempt to bring the person back in, to show them that you're out of fellowship with your family. Right. Like, and that just kind of like, it bothers me. Like, people can just up and leave a community they've been invested in. I just had a conversation with a man who, honestly, he's gone through a lot of garbage at our church in a lot of different ways, and he's just so faithful. And he's just like, I'm telling you, I'm here. He's like, I was told years ago, you don't plant and make your roots, sure, and then leave, because you can uproot it, but you're not going to get all those roots, and it's never going to be as healthy in the next one. And I fear for church hopping Christians in that sense, because the best thing to do is stick it out. Because think about it again. What are we not doing? Would you like a church that never confronts? Would you, if you don't want a marriage that never confronts issues so that they become close, how in the world are we as the family of God going to become a very close group of people if we're never confronting? Mm-hmm. Like, we're literally doing the very thing we wouldn't want a marriage to do because we're unwilling to do it with each other. And I just want to honor the people who've been doing it towards me. There's been some really incredible conversations that I've been having. I don't know about you guys, but coming up and like either apologizing or just saying, hey, this is an issue. And I was like, oh, let's, I mean, I get that more in my life. I make more mistakes and eat more crow than probably I know most people, but,
luckily it tastes like chicken.
I'll talk all about it. But I like that concept, that's so critical, that we would even get to the place, like, I mean, if you think about it this way, you're confronting your husband or your wife, and it's not going well. And so you bring in a counselor, and you bring in somebody else, and finally bring in your church, and it's like, this is over. I mean, this is divorce level is what you're looking at. Divorce level with your church. You're being divorced. And so God is honoring that at this level, but it's a long, patient process. I don't even think you go once. I think you go several times. I think you bring a couple people several times.
You make it clear.
Yeah. You work on it.
Yeah, the work's been done.
All right. Anything else, or you want to get to the question?
Well, we better get to the questions. We're running.
I know, we're running late. All right, so this is a question from Jacob. And Jacob asks, what is the significance of the story of Lot and his daughters, and why is it in the Bible? So I
love this story.
I'm assuming he's talking about...
Not because of the story, but because my son Nate, when he was 7, said, Dad, I want to read the Bible. I'm like, go for it. He's like, where should I start? I'm like, just start in Genesis. And he got to this passage, and he went, Dad, what is wrong with the book with this guy Lot? Yes. I'm like, okay, start in the New Testament.
You know, and so I believe he's talking about chapter 19, verse 30-ish. And it's, you know, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, after that, and his wife is turned into a pillar of salt. It goes on to say that now Lot went out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar, so he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, our father's old, and there's not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring. So it's basically, hey, let's get dad drunk and fool around with him and get pregnant by our dad. And so you're looking at this verse, and it just is like, what the heck is going on? So partly, it kind of sounds like they almost feel like they're the last people on earth. So, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, I mean, is there a view where it's like they thought the whole world was destroyed and they're the only ones left and they needed to procreate? Or is it a thing of Lot has lived a complete life of compromise and comfort, and so that is just part of, and I kind of wrote down some notes for me, but Lot always seemed to have desired wealth and comfort, and compromise for it. We see it too when him and Abraham are splitting, and he chooses the luscious, fertile Jordan Valley, and settles right near Sodom, and then he became part of the city. He became influential in that city, and then when the angels came, and he knew that this was an evil city, he offers his daughter to the people, and I think that was like, okay, I don't want to do anything bad to God's people, these angels, so I'm going to take them in and do the bad to my daughters so that these people will go away, because that's the easiest thing. I don't have to face the confrontation or the battle. So again, it's that comfort part. And then again, the girls grew up in this sexually immoral city of Sodom and Gomorrah, so they didn't really have a moral standard. I mean, which one do you think it leans more to, and what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the last one fits well with the narrative in a sense that what we're looking at here is a group of people who were in Sodom and Gomorrah, and really, honestly, they're given a mercy, even though like they really shouldn't have been. Like Lot was with them long enough that
we shouldn't have been either.
Yeah, exactly. And so like you look, and his wife looks back longingly, and she's gone, and he runs to Zoar begging like, "Don't let me die." And he's in Zoar, and he goes, "I want to go to the hills." Like it doesn't even stay at the place he begs to stay at. And so Lot is just this fickle guy who's like, he could have had comforts in Zoar, but now he's going to run up into the mountains and become a caveman. And so caveman Lot and his daughters who have grown up, in this very immoral situation, they're like, we're more concerned about our progeny and our futures than having sons. And basically a woman would be thinking, well, dad ain't doing anything to go get us wives. So we're probably ostracized or whatever, and we don't know where to go. So we need kids because they're going to take care of us. And this is kind of the mentality of the ancient world. Your sons would take care of you. But it's also, I think, just a kind of a dig at the kind of culture that the Ammonites and what are the names? The Ammonites and the Moabites. The Moabites are known like as the Las Vegas kind of like Northern Nevada kind of people, you know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, they let prostitution. They're like the Moabites, And yet, what's a weird thing is the Moabitess named Ruth is going to become the lineage of David and the Messiah. So, but in this case, you've got these Moabites and the Ammonites, both kind of Gentile people who are a little sexually crazy and weird, just like Sodom. And it's sort of like this is just a dig on the nations that they need to get rid of, because they're not coming from the real standard and where it should be. That's coming from this paganism and this background of paganism. I don't know, Stephen.
Well, there's a lot here. A couple things is it's important when they throw out names and descendants that the Jews would have known these would have been Moabite descendants, and the Moabites have had this love-hate relationship, and they've been antagonists. So this has ramifications later down, but it also just shows, like, in a really weird way, him and his daughters leave to go live in a cave after God destroys the world that they lived in. Sounds awful like a dark version of Noah's Ark, in the sense that instead of waiting for God's promise and following that promise, you feel you need to go out, isolate yourself, and you're still living in the terror of what just happened. Here you have a drunkenness again. There's a drunk situation and an incestual situation again. And then what it brings about is this lineage that is constantly antagonistic to the lineage where Christ comes from. So this idea that you can take Lot out of the city but you can't take the city out of Lot. And I think what you see are all of the elements of him doing this is like, well, he doesn't even go back to the promise. You think if I failed and God destroyed the city I lived in, I would go hang out with Abraham and wait for the promise. Instead, he runs away from everything and takes his family with him. And they were like, well, I'm afraid I'm going to run away. And so he leaves, and then his daughters are starting to respond. And so you just see also for those people who say Sodom had nothing to do with sexual immorality, you could see how all of the different forms of sexual immorality that these women encountered, that he allowed to have them see, is affecting their current relationship. Because now they're like, I want something and I deserve to get it. Isn't that what the men in Sodom said? I want those angels. And he's like, oh, give them my daughters. Like, now we're thinking of people as objects to take and get what we want from and bring about the thing that we want. And so in a culture that's very concerned with the lineage of how Christ comes to save through the promised seed, which is what made Lot blessed in the first place, is that he was close to the promise. When he went out on his own and tried to make his own world, it fell apart and burned and died. And so I think what you're trying to see is, like, even people who are close to the promise can go off and seek out other things. And so to me, I think the story is cautionary to go, yeah, look at all of the ramifications of just pursuing your own desires and going off and doing what you want, or just being in a community and not confronting it. Because he says that Lot was at the gate, which meant he didn't just like live there. He participated in the community and culture. And to what degree do you think that you can't work for the Lord in a community and a culture? It's going to affect you and your family at some point. And God was merciful and still saved him. But I think that's what the story shows, is that, you know, when you stray away from those things and you pull away, that you still need to be close to the promise, because you'll live out what it is. And I feel this a lot with there's this miracle that happens. Lot and his whole family are taken out of this situation. You could say, oh my gosh, I was saved.
Right.
And the thing is even though you were saved, you still had to work on the sin that got you there in the first place. And you don't do that from running away from the things that were in your heart, because they still have consequences. And so that's what I think it shows, that even when you're saved miraculously from destruction, there's still an obligation to follow the promise.
Another interesting thing is the language. So, you know, in the text where the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old and there's not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father. And what's weird is that term.
Well, yeah.
Come, let us make. Come, let us.
This is like the Nephilim.
Well, no. What's weird is that it shows in Genesis. It shows up. Genesis 11:3. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." This is a rebellion against God. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower."
Babel.
That's Babel. And then it's, "Come, let us make our father drink." And you're like, oh, that is the exact same language. Now, there's another point later. It says, "Come, let us sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites."
Yeah.
The only time that it comes out of anybody's mouth that is like a good thing, it's God says, "Come, let us go down there and confuse their language." He uses their language to bring back upon them their desire. And so you could say, and in the context, remember that Lot is Abram's nephew. And so there's this sense that whoever blesses Abram gets blessed. And so when Lot is roaming around with Abraham, he gets rich. Mm-hmm. He becomes, hey, when you're good with Abraham, you're in the sweet zone. It gets so big, they get in conflict. And Lot says, I want that one. He wants the rich area. And Abraham goes the other way. Now, what happens to Lot? He sits down. He gets taken in a war. And then Abraham save him. And then he's sitting in the same city. And he stays there. And now it's getting destroyed. And he runs off to a city. He doesn't go to, why does he go to Abraham?
He should have. Yeah.
Why doesn't he go back to Abraham? No, he runs away. All his stuff is destroyed. He's living in a cave. And so what is this? This is his fault. This is Lot's fault. Right. As you do not connect with the people of God, as you do not stay near that, for us it would be, if you're not near Christ, don't expect the blessings.
Well, I think this is true of church.
Right. If you're not near his bride.
You're part of the bride, and if you run away in a cave and live by your family, it's going to just be dysfunctional as all get out. And I see that a lot, where people think, well, I have faith. Well, I believed in the promise, but you're not doing the thing the promise has asked you to do to be blessed. and you're removing yourself from external blessings of the family of Christ. It's always been a family that God wants us to be saved into. It's never an isolation. That's never a good sign in the Old Testament when someone's like, I'm going to go off on my own. That doesn't always work well. You end up in the wilderness, or you end up being in a place that's difficult. Unless God call you there, it's typically not a good thing.
And that's what I do think that those two ideas, you can't take this, you can take Lot out of Sodom, but you can't take Sodom out of Lot. But at the same time, you can't get away from God's people, God's blessed
His family,
one, and not expect the ramifications of cursing and problems to occur. Like there is a blessing to be with the blessed, and that when you get away, it's going to be a downhill journey.
I think you can see that in history where the church is doing what God asks him to do. The closer you are to that, the better everyone in the community benefits historically. I think you can look at this factually and historically, where the church is doing what it actually says it's supposed to do. The community, the society, and the people around them are being blessed. So I think that's something you can test. But I think that's what made Abraham and all of the descendants who followed Yahweh was supposed to make them attractive to draw people in.
One of the most recent tests that proves that is Nancy Pearcey's book on the toxic war against masculinity. And she went through all this. This is a non-Christian guy who did all this sociological studies on evangelicals, and secular families and parent, and who are dads. And we always say, that men in the evangelical church are exactly the same in their statistics as those who don't go to church.
For divorce or
for the way they treat their spouses,
okay.
Divorce, all that kind of stuff. But if you actually parse out who's going to church and is faithful in their churches and takes the Bible seriously as like they try to live and they're living by it, it's 50% of that number is like light years above the non-church going non-Christian, and the church going quote semi-Christian who's not living it out, but using
nominal
excuse,
Christian is what
the
we call
nominal
it.
Christian is worse than a non-Christian in his treatment of his wife and his family. And so there's this problem that you can even pretend like you're with the blessed, but that's asking for real issues. Don't you dare use God's
name in vain
name as a cover. But there is a very clear sociological distinction of people who go to church, and this is physically,
and obey,
and let it shape their lives and trust the Word of God. Those people have a dramatically different effect in the relationships that they have around them.
Not a perfect one, but a dramatically different one.
Yeah. And I mean, why is it in the Bible? I think everything is in the Bible to either encourage us, enlighten us, or warn us. And I think that this is a cautionary tale, right? I think partly is.
Well, I hope so. I don't want it to be an endorsement.
But I mean, it's like the daughters, and they thought this was a good thing. Okay, let's do this. It's a good thing. And I think part of that is, just that cautionary tale that if you live a life of compromise, it's hard to see what is true and what is good anymore.
You no longer know what a good thing is.
I mean, you see it like if you're hanging out with people and you're participating in very coarse language, you don't even hear yourself anymore, right? If you
3 weeks away from church, and I'm pretty close to that.
If you open yourself up to certain things, then those certain things do not seem shocking to you anymore, and you just become immune to them. And I think that's the caution. And it happens all the time. So we got to get going. But thank you, Jacob, for the question. And
we'll hit more questions as we get rolling.
Send in your
here.
questions.
Send them. Rabbit Trail, obcc.
We love talking about them and not recording them. No, just kidding. We actually would love to have that conversation with you guys. And so, hey, as we close this up, again, thank you. You can send those questions to rabbittrail@obcc.church. That's rabbittrail@obcc.church. And hey, we would love to hear your comments, your questions, and your conversation with us, even online on comments or through the email. So please let us know, and we would just love to connect with you guys. Otherwise, may God bless your week, and you have a good one.
And didn't I just say that? Now he's repeating.
Yes, I am.
Boom, chakalaka.
Boom, shakalaka.
Bye.